Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our 6th webinar in the Volunteer Management webinar series that we started this year. This month's topic is going to be volunteer recognition, easy and cost-effective ways to recognize and appreciate your volunteers. I do want to start the presentation by saying I am not a volunteer expert. However, I'm almost 10 years into the field. I've been doing a lot of research. It's one of my passions. I'm excited that my career has led me into something that I'm so enthusiastic about. Anything that we talk about on these webinars is by no means a requirement for you to implement in any of your programs. In fact, if you like something, a suggestion or a best practice from either the presentation or from your peers who are on the webinar with us today, please make sure you get permission from your supervisors and any other kind of management that you need approval from before you implement anything, just to make sure all of our bases are covered. Try to do some best practices, but not everything is going to work for everybody. I do encourage all of you who are on the webinar to open up your chat boxes. I do like to try and make webinars a bit more interactive as best I can. So if you guys can have those open, I'll be sure to ask you to type in some thoughts. Getting a little bit of background noise and I can't figure out who it's from. So if you can all make sure that you mute yourself, just in case I'm not able to mute you, that would be very helpful. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Before we talk about volunteer recognition, we like to do a recruitment tip of the month every webinar. So this recruitment tip I actually got from our communications liaison as I was working with him and Ms. Keita Cole, who I believe is on the webinar with us, in ways to kind of recruit for the My Ride program and other volunteer programs. He talked to me about the Hey Martha stories. So I don't know if you all remember, I guess I could say back in the day, but it really wasn't that long ago because my dad and mom would do this all the time. A Hey Martha story is when you're reading the newspaper or maybe you have your Facebook pulled up or you're on the news, and typically how how it got started was a husband would be reading a newspaper, look over his shoulder and say, "Hey Martha, come here and take a look at this." And it was a really catchy article that he just couldn't help but tell other people about, especially his wife, maybe the kids, neighbors and such. So I think our volunteers, our programs, our organizations have these Hey Martha stories. You probably see them all the time if you're on your social media pages, memes and things. I do it all the time with my boyfriend. Hey, take a look at this, and we'll get a good laugh out of it. But if we can come up with stories from our volunteers or our programs that not only we want to share with our significant others, our loved ones, our family members, our friends, but if we can get other people to say, hey, take a look at this. This is really interesting. This person's volunteering for this program, had a huge impact. I think I want to. I couldn't think of a story off the top of my head. Maybe you all have a story that you want to share, kind of a Hey Martha story. Feel free to chat that into the chat box for me. But I can just imagine that this isn't really a volunteer story necessarily, but I know for the Stay Active and Independent for Life, the SAIL program, we had a lady who came to the program in a wheelchair. That's how she used for mobility. And she did the class as a strength, balance, and fitness class. She did the class for a year, and then she was able to move around in a walker. So she was able to have more mobility. 2 years, she didn't need any assistance at all. So stories like that may not recruit volunteers, but it could recruit people to your program. So try and look for those Hey Martha stories in any kind of recruitment efforts that you do. So with volunteer recruitment, as you guys I'm sure have known through your own research and trying to figure out ways to recognize your volunteers, there are so many resources out there, so many great ideas. We wish we could do them all, but I've found some really key resources that I think are really great. Sorry, we're getting some feedback. I found it. So I'm going to talk about a couple resources that I kind of based the presentation on, and then in the email that I sent you all in the last couple of days has a lot more resources we'll talk about. So one resource I thought was really great was Sterling Volunteers Volunteer Recognition e-Toolkit Beyond Pins, Plaques, and Parties. So this is more, we're going to talk about developing a culture of appreciation in our volunteer programs. And then there was also, maybe a little bit outdated, but there was a 2013 volunteer recognition study that was done up in Volunteer Canada, and they have some really great resources. I'd love to go up to Canada and pick Volunteer Canada's brain about all their volunteer stuff one day. So those are the main resources that we're going to focus on, and I did attach all of these resources in the email that you all received yesterday as well, so you should have all this information. If you don't, shoot me an email, let me know, I'll get it over to you. So before we get started, this is why I wanted you to open up your chat box. I'm going to ask you guys to tell me some stories, so it's going to be time to share. So I want you to think of a time when you know in your heart that you made a positive difference in someone's life. Now this could be if you were volunteering, it could be in your paid position, it could be in your church life or your faith-based life, anytime, it doesn't matter. It could be in a family member, neighbor, whoever. But tell me a time that you know when you had a positive impact on someone. I'll give you guys a couple minutes to type some things in for me. And I'll give you my story. So I've talked about it many times in these webinars. I volunteer for Special Olympics, love Special Olympics. The one story that will always stick with me was at a state basketball tournament. I was just starting out volunteering, so I was working the scoreboard on one of the courts, and one of the athletes came up to me. You know, I was wishing him good luck, and he goes, I'm gonna score a basket for you. I was like, oh, that's sweet. He goes, and his coach came up to me kind of before the game. Yeah, he's never scored a basket in a game before. So I was like, well, I think he's gonna do it. And wouldn't you know, 5 minutes into the game, he scores that basket. He looks over at me, he points at me, and he just yells, that was for you. And I mean, I probably didn't have anything to do with that. It probably is more of a positive difference in my life, kind of a story, but that story will always stick with me. Even just working a scoreboard at a game can help influence so many different people. So I'm not getting any stories, unfortunately, but I know you all are thinking about that. I also want you to think about, how did you know that you had made that positive impact in someone's life? So feel free to type that in too if you wanted to. I'm hoping I get more interaction from you guys throughout. Let's see. So how did you know? I knew because of the smile on his face, the enthusiasm. I mean, the whole stadium, well, gym, I should say, not stadium, erupted, and it was amazing. Oh, good, I'm getting some stories. So we have Meals on Wheels participants, opportunity to interact with people and have conversations in more rural areas. Excellent. Assisted clients when transitioning from independent living to assisted living. 99 years old, excellent. My Ride West Tennessee, making a difference. Playing music in hospice for hospice patients who were passing away. Absolutely. And we know because people tell us. Excellent, keep the stories coming. So most likely, kind of as you're typing your story and you're thinking about this, you didn't know that you had that positive impression because you got a t-shirt or because you got a certificate or a little token of appreciation. You knew because of those I'm losing my words. Oh no. Not the external things. You knew it because of the internal reactions that those individuals had and shared with you. So with that, we're kind of going to transition into talking about a culture of appreciation. So when you have a culture of appreciation, and I know a lot of our programs already do this, so I'm kind of already talking about things that are in place. But a culture of appreciation makes sure that everyone knows that the volunteers are valued. So the volunteers know that what they're doing makes a difference. You know what they're doing makes a difference. Your board of directors, your executive directors, everyone in the organization knows that a volunteer plays an integral part in making our program successful. Our volunteers are also integrated into our organization's work, so it's a team effort. Staff and volunteers are working together for that common goal, for that mission, whatever our goals and our missions are. And also that we celebrate our volunteers. So maybe rather than having separate events for staff and volunteers, we have them together. So at the end of the year parties or anything like that, if you're going to have a staff invite, see if volunteers can be invited as well. That may not be for every get-together or anything like that. In terms of the team building, can volunteers be invited into some staff meetings if it really plays a part and you're talking about that volunteer aspect? Can volunteers have a seat at the table and really have their voices heard? So really having that culture from the top down to know that volunteers are appreciated. And really when we talk about a culture of appreciation, not only does it go for volunteers, but it goes for staff and your coworkers as well. So we want to make sure everyone feels appreciated and thanked. So we've all heard about our motivations. You have the intrinsic motivations and you have the extrinsic motivations. So the intrinsic motivations are the ones that we really want to focus on. We want to figure out what is the internal drive of our volunteers. The extrinsic motivations, those could be the t-shirts and the tokens and the little things that we give our volunteers. But a lot of the times our budgets aren't really going to allow us to have that many external motivations or those extrinsic motivations. So if we can really build our volunteer appreciation and recognition around those intrinsic motivations, we'll be able to do it consistently and having an ongoing basis. So I did send out an email a couple days ago asking you all to look at the functional approach to volunteer motivations inventory. So I'm hoping some of you filled this out, and I'm actually going to show you on the screen kind of what it looks like. I know it might be a little small, so I apologize. So what this inventory does, and it's a little bit of a long one, and it does have some math involved. So for those of you who may not have done the inventory because of the math, I understand. But this survey really looks at 6 different motivations for your volunteers that are going to help in terms of how you're going to look at recognizing your volunteers. Recognition isn't one size fits all. We do kind of have to look at each individual volunteer to see what their motivations may be and how we can play that to our recognition. So we look at values, understanding, enhancement, career, social, and protective. So hopefully some of you did this. If you did do this, please let me know in the chat box which function is your motivating factor for volunteering. I'll let you know what the top of mine was and the way bottom. But reasons for volunteering, it asked you to rate about 47 questions on a scale of 1 to 7. 1 being not really important to your volunteer motivation, and 1 is extremely important to your volunteer motivation. And then you can kind of rank them out here at the sides. I love doing inventories. I'm one of those weird people that just really like knowing my learning style and all of that. So this is kind of a fun thing that you can do maybe with some of your volunteers. Maybe they don't know what their motivation is, and it'll kind of help you get to know them a little bit better. You can also look at your volunteering outcomes and rate yourself just on that scale of 1 to 7 from strongly disagree to strongly agree. And it'll ask the volunteer, 1 year from now, will you be volunteering with our program still? Will you be volunteering in another organization, or will you not be volunteering at all? So, here's the scoring sheet and where you got to do all your math. So I will let you guys know personally. Let's see, we have quite a few people who've answered that values was an overwhelming top motivation, which is great. So I'll go back up to what those definitions are. So a lot of people, the person is volunteering in order to express or act on important values such as humanitarianism, probably said that wrong, and helping the less fortunate. Excellent understanding. We have some enhance and protection. Enhance was first and protective was last. Mine, the first time I took this was a couple years ago when I was doing a volunteer certification through the Centers for Nonprofit Management, and I could have swore, I was like, I'm values all the way. You know, I want to help people. That's my main motivating factor. Nope, career function was by far the #1 motivation I have for volunteering, because I go to see what other volunteer managers do and to see kind of sort of what I can steal to make our volunteer programs better. So it's kind of a compliment, even though when I say I steal ideas, it doesn't sound all that great. Initially, I wanted to be a teacher, and the ongoing joke in my teaching class was teachers are the best thieves, because when teachers see a really good idea from their peers, they'll take it and adapt it into their classroom. Teachers are not thieves. I meant that more as a joke. But I definitely do that in terms of looking for ways that I can bring back to share with you all in the career function of my volunteer motivations. Social was my last motivation to volunteer. I don't know if that means I'm more cutthroat, like I'm not here to make friends, even though I have made so many friends from volunteering. I kind of was surprised that social function was my last one. So thank you to those of you who filled out the inventory. I encourage all of you guys to fill out the inventory, especially if you want to do this with your volunteers. I think you need to have the practice and kind of know what to expect from the inventory before you give it to your volunteers to fill out. And this also may not be something you want to give at an orientation or to the brand new volunteers. This may be a good idea to give to volunteers who've been with the program for a little bit, 6 months to a year, who've really you've built that relationship with. So hopefully that's helpful. Hopefully you guys will be able to use that. So a thank you, and I know we all know this, a thank you goes a long, long way. So John Temple Foundation research shows that 50% of Americans regularly express gratitude to their family members. However, only 15% express appreciation and gratitude to their colleagues. So our coworkers, our volunteers, potentially. And it shows that nearly all respondents, so I just put 100% because I feel like it would probably be 99.5% maybe. So nearly all respondents said that they wish their colleagues would say thank you to them more frequently. So if we do it at home, which is great, I think 50% we need to increase that at home as well. But we want it, but at the same time, only 15% of us give it. So if we're not going to give it, we're not going to be able to receive those thank yous and that appreciation. So something really interesting to consider and kind of think on, do I thank my colleagues? If you start to thank your coworkers, that's definitely going to trickle down hopefully to your volunteers. Another interesting statistic from the study is that people who were thanked were 50% more productive after being appreciated for their work. Sorry, trying to figure out who that is. if everyone could do me a favor and mute their lines. I'm trying to mute everybody, but I'm not sure who I'm missing. Okay, hopefully that will fix it. But people are twice as more productive if we thank them. So not only will that help hopefully with volunteer productivity, but also if you're a supervisor or you have direct reports, you'll be able to get more people productive and doing what they need to do because they feel appreciated. So there was a question, what was the 50%? 50% of Americans regularly express gratitude to their family members. So we do it at home half the time, but we only do it 15% when we're at work. Or we only do 15% of thank you or appreciation to our colleagues. So I kind of relate that more to work. And then 100% of us want to receive those thank yous on a consistent, regular basis. So also a study in the UK with the Join In organization, volunteers are givers. So it's kind of important for us to know why volunteers volunteer so we can help recognize them. Volunteers are givers. They volunteer for growth, whether that be personal, well-being, professional, in my case. They also do it, as many of you mentioned, through your values and your understanding. They do it for an increased sense of purpose. So volunteers aren't just going to come and volunteer for the My Ride program because they just want something to do. They know the value, and they know that giving those rides to those individuals gives them a sense of purpose. They want a voice. So whether that be having their own input in the volunteer program, being able to do their volunteer role a little more customizably if possible and have a little bit of flexibility with that to enhance the program, but they want their voice to be heard. They also want an easy sign-up system, an easy way to get to the volunteer experience, and an easy way to get the job done. It's easier said than done. So a lot of us have the application process. We typically have a centralized location generally for them to go to. And with our clear volunteer role expectations, they can get the job done. So if we have those components, volunteers are going to stick around. They do want to be recognized, again, specifically being thanked, appreciated, and celebrated, which we talked about a little bit earlier, kind of making that culture of appreciation front and center. And then lastly, volunteers want a social opportunity, make friends, work on a team, some more than others. You remember that was my lowest one, but I do make a lot of friends. So kind of if we think of this, I can't remember what they're called, but for every letter it means something. So volunteers are givers. I know there's a fancy name for it. I can't think of it. We do have kind of a strong disconnect in the data of what volunteers want to see and how volunteers want to be recognized and how the organization actually recognizes the volunteers. So this data was really interesting to me anyway. So volunteers' top 2 ways that they want to be recognized. 80% want to know the impact that they're having, whether it be statewide. Most volunteers are going to want to know how their impact is affecting their immediate community. So that's 80% of people want to know, we've counseled 15,000 Medicare beneficiaries and we saved them $8.5 million in Part D drug costs. They want to know those impacts. We were able to give 10,000 rides to doctors, groceries, to help assist in people's daily lives. Some kind of impact. 80%, an overwhelming majority of volunteers want to know the impact that they're having on the people that they're serving. And then 70% just want that consistent, informal, not formal, informal, in-person thank you. So whether that be you're at an event, hey, just want to thank you for being here. I'm a hugger, Not everyone is a hugger, but I know a lot of you all who've worked with me, a lot of volunteers, we kind of do the whole, are you okay with the hugging thing? And then I give them a hug and say, thank you for being there. Guys, I'll give them a nice solid handshake and thank them for being there. But it's informal and it's consistent. It's on an ongoing basis. Every time I see those volunteers, I make sure that a thank you is coming out. The bottom two ways volunteers want to be appreciated, and this is, again, through a 2013 study. I believe this was, this was with Volunteer Canada. So the bottom two ways, volunteers don't really like the banquets, the more formal banquets. They do like the get-togethers and hanging out more informally, but those formal banquets, not too high on the list. And also being publicly recognized, which when I saw that, I kind of cringed and I almost didn't want to put it in the presentation because our Make a Difference Monday volunteer recognition campaign is doing exactly that. So I was like, oh, dang it, I got it wrong. But these are the two bottom ways volunteers like to be recognized. And these are the two ways that most organizations do their volunteer recognition. So the banquets in particular is one of the most expensive ways that volunteer programs recognize volunteers. Over 50% of organizations say the biggest barrier to doing a volunteer recognition is not having the funding to do it. So if you look at the top two ways volunteers like to be appreciated or recognized, it doesn't really cost anything, depending on how you do it. You know, if you send a letter, you know, that's going to cost you some postage, but just an in-person thank you, it's free. So definitely an interesting way to kind of look at the recognition from the volunteer perspective. A little bit more on the data disconnect from volunteers and organizations. So we have recognition practices and preferences. So if you look at kind of the light purple, grayish bar, that's representing volunteers, and the red one, the solid red one, is the organizations. So we can see which area the volunteers enjoy and want to be recognized in their preference. So it looks like the biggest preference is communicate the impact of the volunteer directly. So we saw that in the slide previous as well. It looks like about 80%, like we said, the volunteers want that. Organizations only do that about 55% of the time. So maybe we can work on increasing that. Provide formal letters of reference and recognition. Organizations do that a lot. I always tell volunteers, if you need a letter of reference, if you need anything like that, let me know, we'll do it. I'll send those letters. So I'm doing it wrong. And I'm always the first one to admit that as I do these research things, I will admit when I'm doing something opposite of what I'm supposed to be doing. And it's just going to help me change and evolve and become a better volunteer manager. So where we're kind of even, the informal group outings and get-togethers, that's in like the high 30s, low 40 percentile. I think that has a lot to do with funding. So organizations aren't able to do it as much. Volunteers, it's not #1 priority, but volunteers do like it if the organizations are able to do that. Banquets, this is the biggest disconnect. Volunteers don't really want to do a banquet or a formal gathering. Formal is really key to that. Where volunteers don't like it as much, that's kind of what the organizations do a good majority of the time. Another one is communicating the impact, which again, we've talked about kind of the highest way volunteers want to be recognized. Then that public recognition of volunteers, organizations do that a whole lot where volunteers don't necessarily want that to happen. So it's really interesting. Kind of take a personal inventory and see if you all are matching up to these statistics. Hopefully not. I mean, this is, like I said, in 2013, so things have hopefully changed. I did want to show you guys an amazing example of showing the impact of your program and how volunteers have helped. And I did get permission from the Southwest Tennessee Area Agency on Aging and Disability, and I got to give Keita Cole, who I believe is with us. I think I call Keita out every webinar, but she's awesome. And putting this impact flyer together. So this is what they developed, and you kind of can't see it down here on the bottom. This is specific for how they've served older adults through the COVID-19 pandemic. So it's through a very specific time frame. It's March 1st, 2020 to May 31st, 2020. So just in a 3-month period. And you can see, if I was a volunteer, I would love this. You know, I love to know that I played a part in delivering 48,556 meals. Or I was one of the 75 volunteers who did those meal deliveries, performed those errands, did that telephone reassurance, helped box those 260 food boxes. Oh, we have a recommendation or a request, Keita, on how to make something like this. So how to do the technology aspect. So Keita, we might be looping you in on how to make things fancy. But I did want to give that shout out, and I think this is just an amazing way to show the impact for so many programs, and then you can also adapt this into just a single program. But great job, Keita, great job, Southwest Tennessee Area Agency on Aging and Disability for serving through this COVID-19 pandemic. And I know the effort continues. So it didn't stop May 31st. It's continuing to go. So thank you for that. I think this is just a great example to show exactly what the volunteers want to see. And Keita, I don't know how long it took you to do it. I know you have some design software and you don't mind sharing it with others if they want to send some info. So hopefully it doesn't take too super long. It might take longer to pull the data all together than it does to actually kind of insert the graphics. But great job. It's also important to do your own research. So the data that I cited was, like I said, from 2013. It's from Canada. It's from all over the U.S. So you might want to go ahead and survey your volunteers, whether it's informal or formal. You know, you can send them an electronic survey. You can just have an informal conversation the next time you're together, and ask them how they want to be recognized. You might find that 70% of your volunteers love that formal banquet. So great. The research, you know, and a larger group of volunteers shows that it's not the #1 way volunteers want to be recognized. But if that's how your volunteers want to be recognized and you have the budget for it, go for it. Getting feedback in those small groups, maybe through WebEx right now. I know not a lot of people are able to get together in those small groups, but having those informal conversations. So speaking of Volunteer Canada, like I said, I really wish I could go up there and pick their brains. They have such great resources. They have a really interesting tool that I wanted to show you all, and I'm hoping I can pull this up. Yeah, awesome. So this is their volunteer recognition tool. It's a quick 10-question assessment that volunteers can do, and kind of whatever algorithm they use will say, this is how you like to be recognized. So bear with me. Hopefully it won't take too long, but I thought I'd do a sample to show you guys kind of how easy it is and not super personal. So what would you rather do on your day off? Spend time with a close friend, go shopping. I won't read them all to you. You guys can read the screen. But I'd like to spend time with a close friend personally. Then you can click this arrow button and it'll go to the next question. When you go to a fundraising event, oh, I'm not making a loud entrance. I'm probably going to go look for somebody that I know, get comfortable. What are you most likely to keep? Oh, I always keep my t-shirt from an event. I wish I had kept more t-shirts, and I'd love to find someone who can quilt and put all my volunteer t-shirts together into like a blanket. Oh, that'd be a great keepsake for me. You just had lunch at a local cafe and your server was excellent. What do you do? I let the manager know. I mean, I do almost all of these things, but that's the number one thing that I do is I like to let their supervisor know how great they are. Business line describes, but you keep at your desk. There are pictures all over my desk. Nieces, nephews, mom, dad, sisters, brothers. If you could commute one way, what would it be? So you can tell this is not how we typically commute in the U.S. So walk, water taxi, carpool, limousine service. I'm not that fancy, but I'll walk places. Your ideal vacation? I'd do a cabin in a quiet place. Favorite part of attending a sporting event? I collect souvenirs like crazy. I collect snow globes, so it wouldn't be a t-shirt, but anywhere I go, I have a snow globe of where I've been. How do you remember your travels? Those souvenirs. All right, helpful. So I guess it was only 9 questions. So heartfelt hooray. I prefer a personalized thank you for my volunteer efforts, and it's important for me to hear how my volunteering is impacting others. Perfect. You can ask the volunteers to let you know kind of what their results were and have that in your arsenal for how you're going to recognize those volunteers later on. Again, just another tool. You may not use it. You may just ask why I wasted 4 minutes of your life doing a survey. I hope not. But just another kind of fun way for volunteers. If you're in a group or you want to send them something to do, they might be interested in doing that to get to know them a little bit more. So that's a way that you can try and do your own research to see how your volunteers prefer to be recognized. So we talked a little bit earlier about personalizing recognition. So there's 3 different volunteers. I'm looking through my notes, I apologize. So 3 different kind of main categories that volunteers are kind of sort of lumped into. We have our achievement volunteers. These are our goal-oriented people. They look for time-limited projects. They want to kind of beginning, middle, and end. We have our power volunteers. They seek the assignments with measurable impact. They know what they're doing is going to make a difference. They want to share their ideas and have some influence. And they value positions with prestige and status. So they want those titles associated with their volunteer roles. Then you have our affiliation volunteers. They really prioritize building relationships through work, so they like to be on those teams. They want to be in a warm, friendly environment, and they like positions where they have a chance to demonstrate their care and concern for others. So making sure, they're able to have that one-on-one communication and volunteer experience with those participants. I've also attached the recognition toolbox that I believe is from Milwaukee. I could be wrong on that. I'll have to double check, but I'm pretty sure it's from Milwaukee. They give specific recognition ideas based on these 3 motivation types. So for our achievement motivated people, for example, they recommend the tangible awards like plaques and pins. So, hey, you've reached your 1-year milestone volunteering, you get your 1-year pin, your 5-year pin, things like that. They like those goals. Opportunities to participate in decision making. So if you want to do a recognition banquet or a conference of some kind, put them on the conference planning committees. And they want to advance within the organization. So they might, Special Olympics does this really well. I started just as doing the scoreboard for a basketball game, and now I'm the director of the state basketball tournament. So I'm kind of getting more and more responsibility that shows that they trust me and that they recognize that I'm a valuable volunteer. For your power volunteers, inviting them to be a trainer or a mentor for new volunteers is a good way to recognize them. Invite them to the board of directors meeting. Use them as a consultant. Ongoing program site or an award named after them. You know, if they, maybe you had a volunteer who's been volunteering for 20 years and they say, you know, I'm going to retire as a volunteer. They've had a great impact. Maybe you have a volunteer award named after them. They want to be that influencer to help people volunteer in your program. And we have our affiliation volunteers. These individuals like to be featured. So they want to be featured in that newsletter or the articles, any kind of public recognition that they can get. That's kind of the big one in the notes that they said they like to. They also like those tokens, those t-shirts and things of that nature. The most important thing about a culture of appreciation for your volunteer program is that you keep it going year round. Doesn't matter the season. You're always saying thank you. You're always doing a little something here and there to show the volunteers that you appreciate them. So a culture, we have to make it a priority. So making it a priority means that we incorporate it into our trainings and our orientations so that we make sure that there is time designated, even if it's as simple in terms of making a priority, smiling. You know, we could be having a rough day. It was a stressful morning before the orientation or the training. Make sure you have that smile on your face. One of the big things that I guess I took for granted personally in all of the research says making sure that you call the volunteers by their name is a huge way to show recognition and appreciation. So just, hey, you know, have those name badges, do those name recognition games. I have plenty of them if you guys need any tips and tricks on how to learn volunteers' names faster. Setting the expectations to staff and volunteers, especially the staff that work with volunteers. Every time a volunteer comes in, make sure you say thanks for coming in. Volunteers also in training, make sure you say, hey, be sure to thank the staff who are helping you while you're here volunteering. So it does have to go both ways, and you got to model it from the top down. Like I said earlier, if you're not doing it, you can't expect your volunteers or any direct reports or coworkers that you have to express gratitude and appreciation back. Got to be that servant leader, you know, do as you would to others. And then make it easy. It doesn't have to be super hard. Again, calling the volunteer by their name. You know, if you're a hugger and the volunteer's a hugger, giving them a quick hug at the end, really appreciate you for coming in. It doesn't have to be super hard. So try not to overthink it. The little things make a big difference. So in your resources, especially that Sterling Volunteers Beyond Pins, Plaques, and Parties, they have a lot of surveys and assessments that you can use to help kind of assess your current volunteer program. So the first one is to survey your current volunteers on how they like to be recognized. So that could be a good starting point if you wanted to do some form of more formal survey. Define your culture of appreciation, recognition, motivations, and styles. So you can see those 3 motivation styles that we talked about earlier, that achievement, power, and affiliation, and how you might, just kind of ideas of how you might recognize those volunteers in that cluster. So there's some really great tools in that about 24-page e-toolkit for recognition. So some good resources, hopefully, that you've gained from this presentation. So I did say that we're going to talk about some easy and cost-effective ways to recognize your volunteers. So as I mentioned, there are thousands of ways to recognize your volunteers. I couldn't possibly do all of them. So I picked some of the more common ones that either I've seen other organizations do or ones that were really key in the research. So let's get a little creative here. I know we all do this, so let's see how many people and which cards we do. So there's always the thank you card. You don't want the thank you card after every event necessarily. For example, I know our SHIP SMP program they have volunteers that go to the senior center once a week. So you don't want to send them a thank you card every week saying, hey, thank you for being at the center this week. Thank you again, thank you again, thank you again. But save those thank you cards for something more special, more rare. So for example, anytime I get an email or anything from a client who says, hey, I talked to so-and-so and they were extremely helpful, I really appreciate their service, please pass along my gratitude to them. I'll write a little thank you note and I'll print off the email or the card, make a copy of the card, give them the original card. I'll keep a copy of the card and include that in there and say, hey, I can't say it as eloquently as this client did, but here, just so you know, the impact that you're having. Thank you. Birthday cards. So many of us on our volunteer applications ask volunteers to put their date of birth on there. So if you're able to kind of track that and keep a record, maybe you send them a birthday card. Doesn't necessarily have to do with their volunteer experience, but hey, we recognize that it's a day to celebrate you, and we hope that you have a great day. And this is a new one that I hadn't done before, and I'm working more on doing, but anniversary cards. Hey, can you believe that you've been volunteering with our program for a year already? In that year, you've been able to do this, this, and this, and show their impact that way. Or if it's a anniversary of the program, you might want to send something to all the volunteers. I did this for the SAIL program. After our first year of the grant, I sent an impact card, I think I showed it last webinar, to all of our SAIL leaders with pictures from the year and kind of everything that we've been able to do in just a short year. So it feels like a short year. So maybe looking at cards that way. Here are just some tips and tricks on how things to consider when you're writing the cards, and that impact. Focus on where he or she really shines. Try and get specific. Jot down notes after every event that you work with for volunteers. So that way you have, okay, so-and-so's birthday's coming up. Let me look back at my notes and see if there's anything that really stands out this year that he or she has done. And then it's okay to write a rough draft before putting it on a card. I like to type things out, and then I can edit it. And I have terrible handwriting. Some of you have received birthday cards and thank you cards from me, and you may not have been able to read them all. So I like to type mine out so I can actually read what I'm trying to say, and then more focus on making it nice and neat so the volunteers feel appreciated and not just that my chicken scratch is trying to get something done or check something off of a list I think I need to do. So do you all do cards? Let me know what kind of cards, if you have anything besides a thank you, a birthday card, or an anniversary card. If you guys have any other cards you do, type them in there. Let me know. Any kind of creative things you guys do, I'll share with the group. Volunteer spotlights. This was one of the bottom two things in the research. But as you all know, we do the Make a Difference Monday. So this was the Kitchen Angels at the Loudoun County Senior Center. I guess one way that I really like the volunteer spotlight idea is that it's the volunteers who want to be spotlighted, it's optional. It's not me saying, hey, we have to have this from you so we can highlight you. It's more of I know these volunteers want to be recognized this way. So hopefully that helps. We also do kind of a class, or maybe you have a featured program, featured instructors of the program. And then maybe you give a shout out to a volunteer at a staff meeting or a board of directors meeting. I know a director of a program I used to work for, at the end of the year, she would always have our commission members read some impacts that the volunteers have had, whether it be kind of data statistics, or maybe it was a blurb of a client who recognized a volunteer for something. So not just maybe you doing that announcement, but getting your board of directors or your advisory council or your commission members kind of involved in the announcement. Ooh, I like we had this comment come in going back to cards real quick. If you're able to do cards on maybe your program stationery, so MyRide, to distinguish, hey, this birthday card, this thank you card is coming from the MyRide program. I think that's great. Handwritten notes in them, so not just a standard, card that you can go to Walgreens and pick up. But if you're able and you have money in that budget to do a personalized program card, I think that's great. I think I'm going to steal that idea. I steal all of Kita's ideas. I just need to have a disclaimer that none of these ideas I have are my original ideas. They all come from Kita Cole. I didn't know how else to phrase this, so you can phrase it however you want to, but having, those informal gatherings, some of the research showed that volunteers like to do those, so maybe coffee with a coordinator. It doesn't have to be coffee. Whatever beverage you'd want to have. I've seen this done virtually now, with the COVID and everything. You have Zoom meetings, so you have coffee, but you don't have to provide the coffee. The volunteers at home and can make their own coffee. It's a good way to have those informal chats, talk about some upcoming events that you have. Hey, we really need some volunteers to help out with this route or help make these calls. So that way you can talk about the program, but also get to know your volunteers on a different level. Make it, again, informal. Good for learning. So if you wanted to ask them to do those little surveys that we've been talking about, might be something to do. Or here's just a little update about the program, a little update on a Medicare policy, or since COVID-19, hey, here are the new safety measures that we're putting in place. That way you all know about it for when the programs start to pick up again. Oh, we have a program that has done coffee breaks with volunteers. And it's very informal, but it sounds like it's really impactful. That's awesome. And then if you do have any kind of updated paperwork, I know how much we all love paperwork, but it is part of the process in the program. If there's any kind of updates, especially policies that your organization has in regards to the safety measures, you might have to say, hey, here's a new volunteer manual. You don't have to sign it or anything, but we want to make sure that you have a copy of it. Kind of a good way you'll get a group of people together to kind of kill two birds with one stone, or maybe multiple birds with one stone, as the saying goes. And we'll also be able to have a chance to get to know you a little bit more. So it's not only about us getting to know the volunteers, but the volunteers do want to get to know the coordinators and the people that they're working with. They want to make sure that, they're able to communicate with you comfortably, and you're not intimidating, and you're a friendly face. So it's a good way, informal, absolutely informal. You don't got to dress up. Hey, bring your sweatpants. Hey, just wear jeans. No need to dress up or anything. And really get to know each other. I know a lot of us do candygrams. I love getting a candygram, probably because I have a huge sweet tooth. But many of you have probably done this or seen this. Really good to have at, the first day of a training, or maybe at your orientation, or little things around the office. So I'll just put them all up here. You're worth more than 100 grand. Wish we had 100 grand to give you. You always help me out when I'm in a crunch bar. You're a lifesaver, candy. You're extra special with the extra gum. So little cute kind of sayings that you can have with just a little treat. They don't have to be king-size candy bars or anything like that, but just a little something that, hey, we're about to have a 2-day training. Here's a little bit of sugar to get you through. And also know that we're thinking about you, and we appreciate you and being here. Just a small, tiny token. If you have any extras, I'll take them. So I know the SHIP SMP people have done it. I'm sure many, many other people have done it as well. These are just a few examples. There are so many candygram ideas you can use. One of the new things that I've been seeing a lot, maybe probably on social media and on the news, especially around the COVID stuff, is really spelling out appreciation. So, we have the thank you to our healthcare workers. As you're walking into the hospital, there's big thank yous everywhere. with sidewalk chalk and posters in the windows and things of that nature. I think it was the Knox County Council on Aging, I think, just had like a big, volunteers would kind of drive through and they had signs and people were dressed up and stuff. So I think that's just a really creative way. If you have some people who like to do sidewalk chalk, maybe have a middle school, high school class come in and do some sidewalk chalk on the way into the senior center or wherever you're at. Spell out thank you. Another way to do it is have a wall of appreciation. Now, not all of us are going to have this space, of course, but if you have maybe a bulletin board or something where people can put Post-it notes of thanks. So, hey, you know, you're feeling down, you don't really feel appreciated. Maybe, you know, all of us have extremely packed schedules to where we may not be in the office every day that a volunteer is there. You know, the volunteers know where to go. They know what to do. You don't have to micromanage them and kind of look over their shoulder. So the days that you're not there, potentially, they know that they have a place to go to and they feel appreciated and they know that they're thanked. And they can even participate in thank you on the wall. So just a way to do some, again, ongoing thanks. This is kind of another way to do the wall. And I didn't know exactly what it's called, but I know the First Tennessee Area Agency on Aging and Disability did this, so where they were kind of at a conference and they spelled out in bubble letters, age out loud, I think, and someone from First Tennessee may be on to tell me how to do it. But people were either able to write a Post-it note and kind of put it in there or use a marker and put like what they're thankful for the program. And it's just like, it's a really big keepsake that you can have posted up and just really know that you show appreciation, volunteers are appreciated, and just a big thank you all around. So something to consider. And like I said, there are countless more ideas out there. I've attached in the email, there's 101 ways to recognize your volunteers. That's from Volunteering Australia. 52 appreciation ideas. The Volunteer Recognition Toolbox is a really good one. It has a lot of ideas specifically for volunteer managers, more big ones and small ones. I mean, we could go on and on for hours talking about different ways to recognize volunteers, but I don't want to take up too much of your time and give time for questions and answers. So I sent all those resources out. If you have additional resources that you want me to share with the group, feel free to send to me, and I'll be sure to share it with everyone else. But before we get to question and answers, I did want to give you all some updates on our volunteer campaign. So there's some new people who are on the webinar. This year in 2020, we started the volunteer recruitment campaign is what I initially called it, and now it's just a volunteer campaign where we wanted to get 2020 volunteers for all of our programs. Well, we shattered that in January before the pandemic even hit. So I'm sure these numbers are even going to increase more and more as we start to process all of the new volunteers that have come to help throughout the pandemic. So we're up to close to 2,400 volunteers across all of our programs. And what's been recorded to me is over 37,000 hours of volunteer service. So we're at, I think that averages out to about $950,000, give or take a few pennies. So the campaign, if we met our goal, which obviously we did, we've well exceeded it, and I anticipate the number to continue to increase as more data comes in, was to do in-person lunch-ins in all 9 regions of the state. And when I say 9 regions, Tennessee is divided up into the 9 area agencies on aging and disability in terms of our aging network. So we were going to do 9 luncheons in those regions. Due to COVID-19, unfortunately, this year in 2020, we are not going to be able to do in-person events. Just to all safety precautions in place, you know, limiting the number of people that can be in a gathering. I just don't think that it's feasible this year to do something in person. So we are working on alternative ways. We do want to do something to help recognize all of these volunteers and their amazing effort and everything. We don't know what that's going to look like just yet, but we are working on it. And if you all have any input that you want to let me know, feel free to shoot me an email and give me your thoughts. Hopefully, I mean, kind of sort of quote unquote worst case scenario, if we do, I still personally want to do something in person, and hopefully we may be able to just postpone that to the spring and still recognize people in person that way. Again, nothing is set in stone. We'll have more details in the future, but I did want to give you guys an update on that. So real quick, our next webinar is going to be July 17th, same time, but we're going to be talking about volunteer retention and how to help volunteers stay in the programs longer. And with that, I'm going to open it up to any questions. Feel free to type them in, or if you want to unmute yourself, the lines are open. Let me know what you guys have to say. Questions, comments? Any other ideas that you want to share with the group? Like I said, a lot of people are muted, so you might have to unmute yourself. Well, there's my information. So if you have any questions, want to share any ideas, I'm happy to share and relay the message to everyone else in the group. We really appreciate you guys participating in these webinars. I'll send a follow-up. I'll have the video posted here hopefully this afternoon. I am going to be leaving town, but I do want to get that out before I leave. But well, so thank you all again. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.